Apple's Mac Studio with the Ultra chip. Is it worth the money 6 months later? Today, we find out by breaking down all of the issues that I've experienced over the last 6 months, reviewing who should buy the Mac Studio with the Ultra chip versus who should buy it with the Max chip, who really needs that Ultra, why I personally bought the Ultra, and finally, of course, is it worth the price tag? What's going on, guys? My name's David Tomich. I'm a registered architect here in Western Australia, and today we're going to be looking at the Mac Studio Ultra through 6 months of user experience. Now, this is my daily driver. I have a Max version at the office as well, so I have a good comparison on both of these devices. So let's get started by looking at the issues I've had over the last 6 months with this device. One of the biggest issues I had was the Mac Studio and the Studio display decided to stop talking to each other. First, they wouldn't produce any sound through the actual display. Then the display wouldn't work at all. So this kind of freaked me out because it was quite early on into the user experience. I had to do quite a bit of Googling on my phone to actually understand how I could fix this because I couldn't use the computer itself to understand what was wrong. Eventually, what I had to do was unplug the display from the Studio and fully depower both systems, then reboot as a hard reset, actually be able to turn them back on. Apple has actually identified that this was a problem early on and released a software update for both the Mac and the Studio, so this hasn't happened ever since. I also found at the start that everything was still running on Rosetta 2, and even though Apple said it would run perfectly fine, there was so many problems. I'll use Twinmotion as an example. For those of you who don't know, Twinmotion is a 3D real-time rendering software for architecture. At the start, it would crash continuously. I'd use it for about 5 minutes and it would crash. It wouldn't just crash the program, it would crash the whole computer. You would have to reboot the entire system to be able to bring everything back online. So for the first 2 to 3 months of owning the Mac Studio, this was the biggest burden. Now, the programs that were still running on Rosetta 2 at the early days and still probably are running today actually ran significantly better, which was a huge improvement. But the problem was they were still all running on Rosetta 2. They weren't native, they weren't using the full power of the M1 chips, and they were just kind of a little bit better. For the price tag, a little bit better isn't really worth it. So it took a long time for anybody to even start introducing Apple Silicon native programs, and many of the programs that I still use to date, including ArchiCAD, which I use every single day, is not available for Apple Silicon natively. Well, this brings me to my next point. Should you buy the Mac Studio with the Ultra chip or should you buy it with the Max chip? Well, funnily enough, I purchased myself the Ultra version, and for everybody in the office, I purchased the Max chip. Now, with very good reason and justification. For myself, personally, I plan on keeping this computer for 8 to 10 years, which means I'm gonna get a very long lifetime out of this device. Whereas from a commercial point of view, we only keep our devices for about 5 years until they can no longer keep up with the demands of the office. The main justification of why we purchased the Max instead of the Ultra for the office is simply for the fact everything is still running on Rosetta 2 and will continue to run on Rosetta 2 for a good 2 to 3 years from now. Which means if you think about it, best case scenario, everything transitions to Apple Silicon, maybe 2024, 2025. That leaves us with only 2 years of peak performance on those devices, meaning we've just spent thousands and thousands of dollars for a computer that will only really give us 2 years worth of its best ability. Whereas for me, because I plan on keeping it for significantly longer, that means I do get an extra 6 years of peak performance out of this device when everything does transition to Apple Silicon. I think being an early adopter into the Apple Silicon chipset was, hit and miss a little bit because you got the added benefits of the speed performance, but not 100% of what it could actually achieve. So even now, 6 months later with the Ultra, it still isn't showing its true colors on all programs. But when it does, and when it truly accelerates and becomes fully native across everything that you can imagine, who actually needs the M1 Ultra or potentially the M2 Ultra in the near future? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. If you're a creative working on large projects, you need the Ultra. It's that simple. The Ultra can handle larger files, larger file types, and it can handle a larger diversity of programs running simultaneously. Now, if you're a medium-sized creator, then you can definitely get away with the Max version. Even if you're running some small files, some Photoshop, some Illustrator, things like that, Apple Silicon with the Max chip will be completely fine. But once you get into that high level of detailing, let's say you're designing apartments, giant skyscrapers, you're probably going to need something like the Ultra, if not something even more powerful. And by creators and creatives, I don't just mean architects. I mean architects, designers, engineers, creators of all sorts. Even if you're a graphic designer, an individual artist, a photographer, a videographer, all of these fall under my creative category. Anybody that isn't literally just working on Word, Excel, and Outlook, then you need something powerful. If you are running just Word, Excel, Outlook, and general office work, you probably don't need anything above the typical M1 chip. You can get away with the base model of what Apple offers. So to wrap this up, is it actually worth the price tag? The simple answer is absolutely yes. The Apple Studio with the Ultra chipset is phenomenal now that the market is starting to catch up to the actual hardware. It was a very long time coming, working on Rosetta 2 and then slowly transitioning into the native apps. But as they've transitioned, you can see huge performance improvements across the entire system. Last week, I actually tested Arcad 26's Apple Silicon beta version on the device, and it ran significantly better. It was producing numbers that I never thought would be possible by simply transitioning from a native Intel running on Rosetta 2 all the way to Apple Silicon. So the numbers are incredibly impressive once it does transition. And because it has been 6 months now and well over a year since Apple Silicon has been introduced to the world, the market has caught up and will continue to catch up over the next 6 months, over the next 12 months. If you're looking to buy the Mac Studio with the Ultra chip, and you are a creator with large files, I definitely recommend it for you. Anyway, that's all for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you check out the playlist to the side of me for more great architectural and tech content. If you loved the video, make sure you smash that subscribe button down below, as well as the like button for the YouTube algorithm. And like always, I'll see you next Monday.